This episode is all about the apples. Red apples, golden apples, and poisoned apples. Apples, apples, apples. Apples have a habit of continually reappearing in myth from various cultures. We see apples in Greek, Celtic, Breton, Saxon, and Viking myth. It is an apple that makes an infamous appearance in the Garden of Eden, and an apple that makes a very welcome one in Jewish New Year, Rosh Hashanah. Apples, apples, apples. The symbolism of apples in Western art, myth, and theology is as rich as it is complex. Apples can mean revealed or forbidden knowledge. An apple can mean temptation, sin, the fall of mankind, and it can also mean redemption, immortality, and perpetual youth. Apples, apples, apples. We talk about apples a lot. Not just this episode, but generally. For example, if someone is intelligent, we might call them a smart apple. But if that person spoils our plans, we talk about an upset to the apple cart. Maybe we should have expected it given their family history. After all, the apple never falls far from the tree. If you do decide to give them a second chance, we might say you gave them a second bite of the apple. Then again, maybe you shouldn't trust them. They could be a rotten apple after all. Perhaps you can't help it. You do, after all, love them very much because they are the apple of your eye, and can do no wrong, and you decide to start again and as a treat, go on holiday and visit the Big Apple. Apples, apples, apples. If we start at the beginning, the very beginning, some may say, the creation story of the Abrahamic religions, Adam and Eve, the first man, the first woman, and the first apple. In the beginning, Adam and Eve lived in paradise and were instructed by God not to eat the fruit from the tree of knowledge. Eve is tempted by the serpent and famously eats the apple and then infamously presents the apple to Adam to eat also. As a result, they are cast out of paradise. The rest, as they say, is history. The story endures in language to this day. The larynx in the human throat has been called the Adam's apple because of the folktale which states that the bulge was caused by the forbidden fruit sticking in Adam's throat. It's an interesting side story, but it's not the only story with apples, and it's not necessarily the first story with apples either. Instead, we start with the ancient Greeks. For the Greeks, apples were interlinked with weddings and the lush and abundant garden of Hesperides. At the marriage of Zeus and Hera, Gaia, personification of the earth, presents the couple with a wedding gift, a branch bearing golden apples. Hera, delighted with the gift, asks Gaia to plant the branch in the ground, so that from the branch a great tree can grow. As requested, the branch was planted in the west of Olympus, and it would grow to a great and mighty tree which bore golden apples. But the story's only just the beginning. The Hesperides, nymphs of golden light of evening and dusk, were given the task of tending the tree and gave the grove its name, the Garden of the Hesperides. On occasion, these cheeky nymphs plucked an apple for themselves. Not trusting such mischievous nymphs, Hera placed in the garden 100-headed serpent, which was named Ladon. In some accounts, this is 100-headed dragon, but dragon or serpent, either way, it is still a formidable guardian. Whilst Ladon keeps the nymphs from stealing the apples, it does not prevent all intruders. In the myth, the Judgement of Paris, Eris, goddess of discord, will pluck from the tree the apple of discord, which will have disastrous consequences for mortals later. This is because the Judgement of Paris is the preliminary chapter of the Trojan War, and again, like the garden itself, the roots of the Trojan War begin with a wedding. Thetis and Nereid, a sea nymph. She is as beautiful as she is loving and has the power to change her shape and form. One moment she is her nymph self, the next a dolphin, a sea urchin, a clam, a starfish, a jellyfish, and anything else she wishes. She is also possessed by a curse. This is not what we would call a curse necessarily, but it was to the gods. Her curse was that the child she would bear from any union would be a son, and that son would grow to become greater than his father. The reason why for the Greek gods this is a curse is their history of patricide, the murder of one's own father. Zeus was the king of the gods because he had castrated his father Cronos. Cronos who killed his father, Zeus's grandfather, Uranus. And so, Thetis' husband was a mortal man named Peleus, who, in what many would say is the definition of a good father and husband, he loved his wife and wanted to have a son that would be greater than him. At the wedding of Thetis and Peleus, all of the gods and mortals were invited, and all of the gods and mortals celebrated. That is, of course, except for one, Eris, the goddess of discord. In her spite, Eris inscribed on the golden apple she had plucked from the garden of Hesperides, Callisti, which means, for the most beautiful. Eris snuck into the celebrations and threw the apple into the mix of celebrating deities. The first to see that apple was Hera. As queen of the gods, she naturally thought it was for her and took the apple. Aphrodite, as the goddess of love and desire, believed that Hera had been premature, and that naturally, as the goddess of desire itself, believed it should go to her. Athena, however, disagreed with both Hera and Aphrodite, and reasoned it should be hers, since she alone had both brains and beauty. Zeus was required to judge the contest between the three goddesses as to which one should have the apple. Either Zeus could not decide, or, possibly more likely, chose not to decide. He was wise to know whatever choice he made would lead to future trouble from the two who were not chosen. As a solution to his problem, Zeus chose to give the decision to Paris, a Trojan prince. Paris was not chosen at random. At an early point in time, there had been a contest between Ares and Paris in which Paris had lost and shown his fairness and humility. With Hermes as their guide, the three goddesses, Hera, Aphrodite, and Athena, meet Paris on Mount Ida for him and him alone to answer the question of who was the most beautiful. Each one of the goddesses offers gifts for their candidacy being chosen. Hera offered Paris political control, which would grant him the kingdoms of Europe and Asia. Athena offered her wisdom and skill in war, whilst Aphrodite offered Paris the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris elects Aphrodite as the most deserving, and Aphrodite, in turn, orchestrates the union of Paris of Troy with the most beautiful, Helen of Sparta. It is their union that sparks the Trojan War and would leave Troy in ruinous flames. But apples are not all doom and gloom. A happier ending story with apples is the myth of Atalanta. Atalanta was the daughter of the mortal man Iasos and a nymph named Clymene. Frustrated that he did not have a son, Iasos took the baby Atalanta to Mount Parthenon and abandoned her to be exposed to the elements and subsequently perish. Stay with us. It has a happy ending, I promise. A she-bear, a symbol of the goddess Artemis, whose cubs had recently been slain by hunters, discovered the child and nursed her. Raised by the she-bear, Atalanta became a fearsome huntress with unmatched pace and speed. Devoted to Artemis and like those who follow Artemis, Atalanta dedicated herself to chastity and nature. In later years, at an annual celebration, King Aeneas of Calydon had foolishly neglected to honour Artemis. In her anger, Artemis sent the Caledonian boar, a monstrous wild boar that ravaged land, cattle, and people. No crops could be sown nor animals raised whilst the Caledonian boar roamed the area. King Aeneas, without a choice, summoned a hunting party in which the now formidable Atalanta excelled. Praised by all, she was discovered by her father, Iasos. Iasos, who, given Atalanta's achievements, finally accepted her as his daughter. Almost immediately, Iasos made plans to arrange a marriage for Atalanta. One could be forgiven for thinking that at every opportunity, Iasos was plotting to remove Atalanta whenever they met. He abandoned her as his daughter and upon reuniting, was determined to marry her with another man. We must remember Atalanta was an exceptional woman trapped in her time, but the exceptional has a habit of breaking patterns. A distraught and conflicted Atalanta consulted the oracle. There was one thing that Atalanta knew. Artemis had saved her, and if she consented to be married as she was forced to now, she would be compelled to break her vows of chastity and fidelity to her patron. Atalanta, trapped by her culture. She could not refuse her father. At the same time, accepting her father's wishes meant betraying herself and her vows. The oracle provided her an answer which confirmed her suspicion. The oracle advised that marriage would indeed be her undoing. What was Atalanta to do? It was then that Atalanta had an idea. She was the fastest person she knew. She outran deer and could outsprint a hare. She determined that any potential suitor would have to prove themselves by racing her in a foot race. A foot race she knew no one but her could win. It was a stroke of genius, and her plan worked beautifully. Atalanta could appear to obey her father's wishes and consent to be married, whilst remaining free to pursue her own wishes and remain chaste and dedicate herself to Artemis. As suitor after suitor presented themselves, each one in turn was challenged to a foot race, and each one lost. Atalanta secretly rejoiced. She won all races and remained unmarried, just as she wanted. That was until Hippomenes. Hippomenes loved Atalanta from first sight. She was strong, independent, and wise. She was different from all others he had seen, and his only thought was to be with her forever. Atalanta felt that Hippomenes was different, not like the others. She liked him, and whilst she may not admit it, loved him too. If he was as worthy as she thought, he could win the foot race. Hippomenes knew he couldn't win the foot race against Atalanta. No one could. He also knew that asking Atalanta to give him the race would be beneath her. Determined to seek a way to win, Hippomenes prayed to Aphrodite for help. Aphrodite answered his prayer and granted him 3 golden apples to help him on his quest. When the inevitable foot race came, Atalanta determined that she would not let him win. If he was worthy, he would win without her having to betray herself by giving him the race. When the day of the foot race came, Hippomenes had a strong start. He ran as fast and as hard as he could, but knew it would not be long before Atalanta would catch up and win. Each time Atalanta was about to overtake, he threw one of the golden apples, which Atalanta could not help but pick up. Continually distracted, Hippomenes won the race and the hand of the lady Atalanta. In a rarity for a Greek myth, a happy ending. Whilst Hippomenes had won the race through what we might call creative tactics, both he and Atalanta did love each other and the two were happy together. Regrettably, Hippomenes did not thank Aphrodite for her assistance, and as a consequence, the pair were transformed into lions. Whilst this is a mistake on the part of Hippomenes, it is not obvious the transformation is a curse or if it is divine sympathy. Atalanta had, for her entire life, defied standard gender roles, and so the transformation into a lion suited her. She would continue to be a fierce, strong, and independent person. With Hippomenes and Atalanta, both being lions meant that the pair could always be together and hunt together outside of the accusing eye of Greek society and expectation. For the Greeks, mythical apples are golden, and they come from the garden of Hesperides. It's possible that this garden, described as planted in the west and holds the tree with the golden apples, is actually an orange grove. It is perhaps no coincidence that the Greek botanical name for all citrus fruits is Hesperides, and even today, the Greek word for orange is portocali, named after the country of Portugal, the most Western European country, and from where oranges would be originally imported into the rest of Europe. Then again, we could be comparing apples with oranges. Rarely a wise thing. If we move a little less west and a little more north, we find ourselves in the land of the Celts, and whilst we may be in a different land, we still hear the echoes of the Greeks and, of course, the apple. In Irish Celtic myth, the sea god Manannán mac Lir presented to King Cormac mac Airt a magical silver branch which bore 3 golden apples. When Cormac shook the branch, the sick and wounded, those in pain and those suffering, would slip into a soft slumber and wake the next day. Regrettably, the branch was not or could not be planted, and so no grove grew. More saddening still for the Celts, the wondrous gift disappeared upon the death of Cormac. But apples in Celtic tales are not always so welcome. For the Celts, an apple can mean temptation and loss, as the story of Echtra Condla teaches us. On the hill of Uisneach, Prince Conle was walking with his father, King Conn, who was known as Conn of the 100 Battles, and his father's druid, Corran. In the magic mist of the hill, a woman with glittering green eyes appears before Prince Conle. Puzzled, he asked who she was and where she came from. The woman replied that she was from the Tir na Meo, the land of the living, where people feast forever without effort, everyone lives in perpetual peace, and all are without sin. His father, King Conn, was confused, and the druid Corran alarmed. They couldn't see anyone in the mist. Only the prince seemed to be able to see this mysterious woman. The mysterious woman spoke, and this time all could hear. But still only the prince could see her. She speaks to the prince and invites him to the Mag Mell, the Plain of Delights. Mag Mell is a Celtic otherworld, a mythical realm and a paradise. The woman promises Prince Conle he can live there forever. The prince is tempted, but his father doesn't wish to lose his son. Conn of the 100 Battles turns and asks his druid for advice. The druid Corran summons a spell whereby Conle can no longer see the woman, although the spell is not strong. Enough to mute her voice. The strange woman vanishes into the mist, and as she does, throws an apple to Prince Conle, who catches it and, entranced, eats it. Prince Conle takes bite after bite of its sweet flesh, and yet after each bite, the apple is restored to a whole fruit, as if it had never been eaten. This is not the only power of this magic apple. Almost immediately after his first bite, the apple begins to exert its effects on him. The prince finds he does not need to eat or drink, and at night, when his dreams arrive, they are filled with the mysterious woman dancing in the paradise of Mag Mell, calling his name. Days pass to weeks, and still the apple remains whole, and still Conle finds he has no appetite or thirst, and each night his dreams wash over him like a silver sea, which takes him back to visions of magical Mag Mell, back to sight of the woman with emerald eyes, back to her mellifluous voice calling him. A month has passed, and Prince Conle with his father King Conn and the druid Corran are walking on the plain of Arcomin. He has not told them about the apple he continues to eat in secret. He has not told them about his dreams. It is once again in the mist that the woman with the eyes like beautiful jade set in wondrous pearl reappears again. Only the prince can see her, but all can hear her mystical voice. King Con asks the druid Corin for his help once again, but this time he is too late. The woman with sea-green eyes approaches. She tells Prince Conle that the druid Corin is a demon that is whispering deathly words. Prince Conle finds he can't hear the druid. He can't hear his father call his name. All he hears is the woman's voice echoing in his mind and his heart beating the rhythm of her words. Prince Conle looks to his father. He finds himself torn between his father and the woman. Despite his love for his father and people, he finds himself irresistibly drawn to the woman. The prince stretches out his hand to her and finds the woman's delicate fingers weave around his. Hand in hand, the prince and the woman disappear into the mist and to the land of Mag Mell, with the magic apple still in his pocket. From the land of Mag Mell, we move to the Arthurian legend of Morgan Le Fay, and we meet once more the delicious, crisp apple. Morgan Le Fay, also known as Morgan the Fairy, is a powerful deity. Some describe her as an enchantress, others a sorceress. Whatever she may be, she is generally benevolent to King Arthur and is his magical protector. She lives on the island of Avalon, which is considered the Isle of Apples due to it being populated with apple trees as far as the eye can see. An echo of the Greek, perhaps, a sacred place known for its apples and inhabited by nymph-like beings. Sounds very similar to the Garden of Hesperides. The Greeks, Celts, and Arthurian legend all have apples. They are not alone. If we go to the north, to the land of the Norse and the tales of Asgard, we find the Vikings have their apples too. The Norse gods, in fact, are dependent on apples. In Norse mythology, the goddess of eternal youth is known as Idunn. She keeps a box laden with apples that are exclusively eaten by the gods. Perhaps somewhat unusually, the Norse gods age. Odin, Loki, Thor, Frigg, Baltir, and their kin all grow old. To maintain their power and youth, they consume the apples provided by Idunn. In addition to their own magical apples, Norse gods have their own golden apples which they can bestow as gifts. Freyr, the god of kingship, seeks to woo his future wife Ger with golden apples. And when in the mortal realm, King Freyr finds he and his wife are unable to have children, his prayers are answered by the goddess of marriage and motherhood, Frigg, who sends the couple the apple of fertility. Apples, apples, apples. A question we might want to ask is, why do apples keep appearing? We see them in myths, fairy tales, and companies, each one with its own story and mythical lineage. Even more perplexing, perhaps, is that despite the many different representations of apples, the most common perception of the apple in the Western mind is that of temptation and sin. Why is this? Our answer may lie once again in the beginning, the very beginning. The book of Genesis in the Bible. We return to the Garden of Eden once more. At the start, we mentioned the infamous apple and the fall of mankind. But if we read the book of Genesis, the forbidden fruit itself mentioned is never identified. It is a popular tradition in Western thought that holds it's an apple. A possible reason given is that this is a mixing of language and myth. Latin borrows the Greek word melon. This imported word into Latin has two meanings. Generally, it refers to the fruit of any tree, and specially it means an apple. In addition, Latin has its native word that sounds very familiar. The word malum, which means evil, and where we get words such as malice and malevolence from. Is it possible over time that the two words have become mixed in the minds of ancient scribes? Added to the linguistic mix is a blending of religious stories. Some argue that the Garden of Eden is a retelling of the Greek Garden of Hesperides, and the snake tempting Eve is the Greek serpent Ladon. It is a very compelling idea because the early Christians included Greeks and Romans who would have been very familiar with the story of the Garden of the Hesperides and the magical apples therein. It is perhaps this cocktail of myth and language, distilled over centuries, that gives us one of the most iconic stories and symbols we have, the apple. This is The Gods Are Alive, where we explore myths and their modern equivalents, stories of gods old and new and what truths they have. If you enjoyed this, please like and subscribe to the channel.